is everybody's packed in there. There were no spare seats at all. People were actually sitting in the aisles. And it was 5 days, so 5 days long. The temperature was 110 to 115 degrees, and we only had a couple fans. So if they can make it through 40 hours of lecture in a packed room like that, you guys can tolerate a little bit of chill here. But it's one of those things where when you look at the world's resources, and specifically Christian resources or Christian teaching, the United States only has about 5% of the world's population, but we have over 90% of the world's Christian resources, seminaries, biblical materials, online resources, libraries, various stuff like that. And so to be able to impact groups like the Mignoni Orphans Trust or in India or things like this is incredibly important. But we need to come back to the day after Ascension, which we celebrated on Thursday with the Ascension Day Feast. Next week is Pentecost, and so this is sort of our last Sunday of the Easter season. And today we're looking at two stories in particular. There's this text out of Revelation, which I'm really not going to, it's one of those where you kind of look at, okay, it's kind of post-resurrection, but it's really about the end of the world, and it ties in very thinly with these other two texts. These two texts about the post-resurrected Jesus are really important, and I want to look at those today. Now, the first one we're going to look at in Acts, I want to show you some of the historical and cultural background material that helped bring that text to life. And then when we get over to John's text, we're going to look at how John just kind of takes rules for grammar and the way things work and just throws them out the window and does some really interesting things. So I'll teach you how to do Johannine theology when we get there. But the first thing I want to do is now where is that? Screen sharing. Okay, we came off, so this is something else. Yeah, that wasn't me. What is going on? Well, it's not. Yeah. I'm getting kicked off the network. That's the problem. I'm getting pushed off. Okay, I'm back on now. Yeah, what is... Okay, so, Acts 16. When we look at the story that we have of the slave girl and then Paul being thrown into prison, these are all post-resurrection stories looking at the impact of the resurrection, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection on the early church. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is how does Paul get from Galatia, where we looked at for the past 3 weeks, where he's over in Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and then all of a sudden he's over in Troas and then Philippi. Well, the traditional way, if you have a study Bible, or you have got a Bible app on your smartphone, which everybody should have, because these things are amazing now, and you can get some great atlases as well, interactive atlases that will work on there. The traditional way that they show Paul getting from the region of Galatia where he went on the first missionary journey, and on the second missionary journey he goes over, he follows up those churches, and then the next story you have, he's over in Troas, which is right next to Philippi. And it's in Troas, Paul has the vision of the Well, the traditional route has this red line going from the middle of modern-day Turkey, kind of up. You won't see this icon with every feature. Continue, let me. Well, the problem is, who has the control for the Apple TV box? Over here? No, I need the Apple TV one, not the projector. Nope, not that one. It's a little thin guy. It's real thin. No, that's his iPhone. Yeah, it's about an inch wide, about 3 inches long, and about 1/8 of an inch thick. Here we go. What it is, it's the interface between my. Pardon me? Well, we'll give it a try. Nope, this one's. We will try it again here. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can't. While you do that, nope. Let's try this one. Connecting to Apple TV. Oh, brother. Okay. All right, so we shall try this again here. Well, see, the problem is, yeah, the problem is that this little unit right there is that it? Or is that Yates? Oh. That's what's knocking me off. So anyways, the traditional route has Paul walking from Asia Minor over there to Philippi. The problem with this is that, we'll see if this holds. The problem with this is that Luke doesn't tell us anything about from Galatia over to Troas in Asia Minor. And recent research in about the past 50 years, but it's really kind of bubbled over to biblical studies now, has really looked at Roman roads and transportation, how people got around. And it turns out that there are 2 faster ways and 2 cheaper ways to get from Asia Minor over there to Philippi. And they go a completely different route than you would expect. This route is based on walking, because they thought, oh, Paul, Luke, these guys, they walked everywhere. Well, it turns out when Romans traveled, they didn't walk. What they did is they took boats. So the fastest route would be to walk over to Areopolis, go down the Meander River, and then catch ocean sailing boats up. If Paul walked the traditional route, it would have taken 45 to 50 days. If he went this route, it would take 20 days, and it would cost half as much. If we want to go the cheapest route, he would backtrack his steps, go straight down to the city of Perga, and then sail around. That would take 23 days, and it'd be about 1/3 the price of walking there. Why? Because when you get on a boat, you've got a large boat. You don't have to walk, you don't have to travel, you don't have to pay for food along the route, you don't have to pay for somebody to carry your belongings or things like this. So they have sites where you actually can go into, there's one at orbis.stanford.edu. It's an interactive map of the ancient world. And you can actually plug in, because when Paul walks from, let's say, Galatia over to Troas for 45 days, you can plug in, okay, let's say he takes 20 pounds worth of supplies with him, which would have lasted in that day about 4 or 5 days. That would have cost about 10 denarii. But let's say he takes 50 or 60 pounds worth of stuff with him. Now you're up to about 120 denarii, because you're putting on pack animals or carts. If you put it on a boat, these river barges or seafaring boats, they're much larger. You don't have to feed the animal. You don't have to stop at night. You don't have to pay for lodges, because you've got a place to sleep on the boat. So they're cheaper, they're faster. The other thing, ministry-wise, that they do is they let Paul, Barnabas, Silas, Luke, the band, Timothy that he's traveling with, talk and fellowship as they go. But also, you've got a captive audience on that boat. You've got people that can't escape. You know, it's kind of like, that Paul, he keeps driving me nuts. I'm not going to stay tonight at the inn. I'm going to walk on and get ahead of you guys. Well, on the boat, it's kind of like, you know, probably a few people did jump ship. But he's driving me nuts. But they're on the boat with them. And so it really changes how we look at how he got around and the transportation modes. But that's just a little side. That's one of them. Yes, yeah. The next one we come up to is Paul reaches Philippi. Now, I know why they start the story here for length of time in services and reading the text. The problem is that you've got 3 people that Paul meets in Philippi that Luke tells us about. Lydia, the seller of purple, the slave girl, and then the jailer. These are the 3 characters he focuses on. Lydia is by far and away the most important character. She's one of the wealthiest people in that region, probably within the Roman Empire. She's a seller of purple, which means that she has connections with the highest members of the Roman aristocracy and families, probably Caesar himself. And it's a female conversion without a male paterfamilias being around. And she's the only person in the book of Acts that wins an argument with Paul. The other thing is, she's the first conversion when the gospel goes from Asia Minor into Europe. So there's cultural, geographical, gender, economic, all sorts of reasons that come in with Lydia. After Lydia converts and Paul's staying at her house, Paul's ministering in the city there, and you have this girl that comes along, and it says that she has a spirit of divination. And I don't like to disagree with English translations, but this is one where it's just horrible. It literally says that she has the spirit of a python. Okay, and you go, huh? What the heck is that about? And this is one of these cultural, historical issues that's going on here. And you need to know Greek culture to understand what's going on. We don't have Heidi White in here, do we? Oh, God, when you need her, she's always harping on the classics, you know. But anyways, pardon me? Yes, yeah. You have the story of Apollo and his temple at Delphi. Yep, we're just going to keep wrestling with this little. I can't. I need the remote for the Apple TV to override it. Yeah, just keep. Yeah, rebooting the system. What happens is Delphi is considered the center of the universe, the center of the world. And they actually have a stone there that they considered the navel of the world. This was the center of the world. And it was over this vent, this kind of earthquake vent, where they thought like sulfur gases came up. And the oracle at Delphi would sit on this stone, and they think it's because they were getting all these sulfur and different toxic gases that were coming up from the earth back then, that it would put them in these kind of hallucinogenic type trances. The problem is when Apollo goes there, there's another god that protects that site. And that's the earth god, Gaia, who gives birth to Zeus and all these other Parthenon gods. Okay. And she is protected by a dragon, or a huge snake called Python. And Apollo goes there and kills Python with 100 arrows. The Python then is swallowed up by the earth at this location. So you have, at this time, let me move on. You have, here's a woodcut. Sorry, I was in my haste. I was punching too many times. A woodcut from the 1500s of Apollo killing the Python. And then this is his temple, the temple to Apollo at Delphi, where the Delphic oracle resided and the omphalos, this stone that was the navel of the world, was. Now, a couple of things. One is this location was also called Pythia, the temple. The most famous prophetess that lived there was a woman by the name of Pythia. You had the Pythian Games, like the Isthmian Games or the Olympic Games, that took place in this location. And oftentimes, when it spoke about divination, or someone who had a power of divination, it said that they had a python, because this all goes back to Apollo killing the python there within Greco-Roman literature. So when it says she has a spirit of a python, this is tying in with that Greco-Roman cultural background of what's going on there in the story. The other thing is that this is a slave girl, and the word that's used there probably reflects a girl maybe 10 to 14 or 15 years old who has got this spirit of divination that's taking place. Now, when she cries out, she's crying out that these men are servants to the Most High God, and that could be a reference to Zeus, but it could also be a reference to Yahweh in the Old Testament. It echoes Old Testament language. And he's proclaiming, these men are proclaiming to you the way of salvation. You would think, wow, free advertising. What more could you ask for? The problem is it agitates Paul, and so he casts the demon out. Now, Luke likes to parallel stories in Acts with either between the apostles in the book of Acts or with stories out of the Gospels. And in the Gospels, especially in Luke, you've got two stories where you have demoniacs following Jesus around going, "Thou art the Son of the Most High God." And then Jesus exorcises the demon from them. So this story parallels those. But one of the things that's interesting about this story, going back to this, is A, you have the python, but also if you have the story of Lydia before and you go, kudos to Luke for including such a major female conversion, the story of this girl then flips the coin. You kind of go, oh man, this is one of these horrific stories in the New Testament. Because this girl, it says, it's going to be in the next text. It's going to talk about her owners, her chorii. It probably appears that maybe 5 or 6 guys came together and bought this girl. And they're using her as a slave to be like a fortune teller to do these things. Now, what happens when her ability to tell fortunes is lost? Well, she enters into what Aristotle called doubly cursed. A, you're cursed first because you're a female, and according to Aristotle and Plato, females were imperfectly formed men. That's why they come out the way they do in the womb. They're thought, no, I would. But then the second thing, slave. A slave is not a human being, it's a piece of property. So when she loses this ability to tell fortunes, she's probably going to be pushed over onto the other side of the coin, which is sex trafficking. And so we don't have anything about her conversion here or what happens to her after this demon is cast out. Luke more focuses on what happens to Paul and Silas. But it's one of these stories that's really tragic. In fact, the early church fathers, realizing this, oftentimes read into this, oh, you have Lydia's conversion, the slave girl's conversion, and then the jailers, because they want to get rid of the question everybody in that culture would have asked, what happened to this girl after this? We don't know. Moves on in the story. The slave owners then bring Paul before the magistrates. And they bring him into the market, the agora, where they do this. Now, there's two things that happen here. The first one is, make sure, okay, I don't have the word here listed. It says that they bring him before the magistrates, up there in about the 5th line down. Now, these are sort of like the local rulers, and the marketplace isn't just where you bought and traded things. This is like the public square. You would go to talk to people. There would be a fountain there. The restrooms are in the marketplace. But it's also where you took care of daily sort of city affairs. And these people that they're brought before the magistrates are kind of like the first level, sort of like the booking officer at the jail. You know, is this person guilty or not, and what are we going to do with them? The judge will come next. That's a higher official, and Paul hasn't gone before them yet. You get that comment later on in the story. And you see this in Jesus' comments also. In the Gospel of Luke, he says, when you're indebted to someone, try and make peace to them, lest they bring you before the magistrates. The magistrates throw you in jail, and then the judge will keep you there until you've paid every last cent. So you get magistrates and judges in the Gospel of Luke, and you get it here also. So he comes before these guys, and they make a charge. Now what's interesting here is it says these masters, these guys who own this slave girl, it's interesting they don't say he cast out her spirit, because how are you going to prove that? You know, oh, bring her up here, let's see. I don't know. I think she's no, I think really she, you know, how are you going to determine if someone's lost the spirit of a python? And so what they do is they bring a racial charge. These men are Jews. Anti-Semitism was rampant in the Roman world. It's, you know, comes all the way down to about the 1940s. But here's an instance. These men are Jews, so you have a racial charge that's brought against them first. Then you get a legal charge. They advocate customs that are not lawful. And then you get a social charge, that these practices are something that Romans can't accept or practice. So they bring a racial, a legal, and sort of a cultural charge against them. But once again, Luke is paralleling what takes place in the gospel. When Jesus is charged, the people that step up and bring charges against him, they say, this man is advocating customs and practices that's illegal for us as Jews to follow. So he wants you to see that the same charges that are brought against Jesus are brought against the apostles. The same conflicts that Jesus enters into, the church enters into also. Then they beat them with many rods. Paul talks about this several times in the letters to Thessalonians. He says, you know how harshly I was treated in Philippi. In 2 Corinthians, it talks about 3 times he received this blow. And these were kind of like the clubs police used to carry until, you know, everything's just going downhill. Police today, they carry tasers. I mean, you know, there's a little plastic gun. I mean, cops were cops back then when they had a big, bludgeon, and they could point that thing right at you. You making trouble? But this is what they would beat them with. And probably, it could break bones. It would cause lacerations, all kinds of issues. This is not something to be treated lightly. They are then thrown into prison. You have the earthquake, and I don't know how many commentators I've read where they say, for the doors to be thrown open, all this story, this is typical of earthquakes type things. They've never been in an earthquake. I've been in a couple good ones, and I can tell you, doors don't open after earthquakes. The whole house is twisted, and that's like the last thing that works. What works now are windows, because all the glass is shattered out of them, and so you get in and out via windows. And for the locks to fall off, the stocks. It's that something happened there, something miraculous that Luke describes as an earthquake, but opened the prison's doors, and it lets the locks off, and the jailer goes, I'm going to die. And this is one of these things within the Roman Empire. In fact, in the book of Acts, you've got a story earlier where some of the apostles have been arrested and they were let out, and Herod has the officials, the jailers, brought in and wants to know where they are. And they go, I think they're back out teaching there. And it just quickly says, and so Herod had them killed. You know, they're just seen as you didn't do your job right, these guys got away, you know, they find themselves quickly life impaired. But this instance, the jailer comes forward and he confesses. Now what's interesting here, he comes up and he says, "Sir, what must I do to be saved?" Paul says, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ." He was baptized at once, he and all his family. Now, a couple little things here culturally that are going on. Number one is, in the early church, to be hauled before the judges in a city and charges brought up that really aren't just, was fairly common. To be thrown into the prison then was fairly common. And I think this story is specifically included to let the early church know that these people are not your enemies, but they're in need of Christ as well. And you see Paul not trying to escape them, but engaging them. And he shares the gospel with them. And so it becomes a model for the early church to go forward. When I was teaching in the Czech Republic, I had some senior pastors there that had been imprisoned under communism. And one of them came up, we were talking about persecution and how to deal with it and how you deal with unjust officials. And he was talking about how when, before the fall of communism, when they were in prison, if they were tortured, they would cry out especially loud so that the other pastors or church leaders who were in prison would hear it. And then if communism ever fell, we would be able to testify in court against these guys to get them back, you know, to make sure this doesn't happen again. And he said after the fall of communism, him and like 3 other pastors went around and they tracked down these communists that tortured and imprisoned them. They found them at their house, tracked them down, and they would knock on the door. And of course, he's like, "What's going on here?" And they would say, "You know, we've come forward, and we wanted to let you know something. We want to confess something to you, that this is what we were doing while you were torturing us." And they said, we want you to know in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ that we are here and we're going to tell you that we forgive you for all that you've done because we realize that you did it in ignorance, and that we want to shed Christ's love with you. And he said it was amazing the number of these guys that would then convert. But they weren't doing it for conversion. They were just going around kind of, they said, they looked at this story and they said, we have to take a different model for what we've been doing. So this story, I think, is included here for the early church to see that, yeah, you're going to face persecution, you're going to be in prison, but the people who are doing it don't understand what they're doing, and they're just as in need of Christ as anybody else, and they're just as open to the gospel as anybody else. So don't be afraid to open your mouth and share it with them. And Paul gives a great example here. The final thing I want to point out here, it says, and he was baptized, he and all his family. And that probably includes slaves and hired help that is within his house. And we kind of read it and we go, oh, that's talking about like the whole family believed and converted in Christ. What you have here is within the Greco-Roman culture, you have the paterfamilias, the head male, he converts, and now as a result, everybody within the family converts as well. You'll see this a lot in Asian cultures or Islamic cultures or other African type cultures sometimes, where the head male, what the decision they make is what the whole family does. And we kind of look at with our individualistic culture and we go, oh, it was all superficial. No, in their culture, he decided, everybody follows along. You're going to get the flip side, though, in 1 Corinthians and Romans and other texts that Paul talks about, where you have women, children, or slaves within the family that convert, and the paterfamilias hasn't. And so then he has to talk about what do you do in a situation like this. But this is the flip side of the coin, where everyone converts, and we just kind of go, that's wild. But that's culturally what took place there. So that's end of Acts. Now we're going to move into John. And I'm moving really quick because the projector, is it still going? Okay. Okay. So John, you hit this section in John. And you kind of go, this is really convoluted in what's going on. John takes a number of ideas, let's say 3 or 4 ideas, and he just winds them in and around on each other the whole way through. So I'm going to teach you how to do Johannine theology right now. It's really easy. You got to hold your hands out in front of you. I'm very patient. I'll wait. Okay, now turn them over so your thumbs are down. Cross them over. Grab them. Okay, now the tricky part. Inside, like this. This is what John does with theology, okay? He'll take an idea like love and faith, or keep and remain, and he takes these ideas and he just hooks them together and twists them around on each other. And a lot of times what you have to do is you have to kind of break it down into little nuggets to see what's going on here. So let me show you with this first one what's going on here, this first passage. And I've kind of color-coded it. The first all, you get all these that's. That, so that, things like this. In Greek, this word that is used to show a conclusion, and it's based on the previous idea. And this is one that when you read the Greek grammars, they go, oh, John must not have known Greek grammar. Because you get that, and you go, you only have one of these, maybe 2 in a sentence, and he throws 6 in a line here. But notice, that they may be one, that they may also be in us, that the world may believe, that they may be one as we are one, that they may become perfectly one, that the world may know that you have sent me. Now, the 2 that really look like he uses the idea here are the ones I've got in red. So that the world may believe that you have sent me, and he repeats it again here at the end. One of the big purposes or end goals of unity and love within the church is its witness to the world. So that's one of the key things. The second thing is, notice how he entwines these ideas. That they may be one, just as you, Father, are in me. So the Father is in the Son is in the Father, that they may be one in us. So that the Father's in the Son's in the Father, and they're in us. And then he goes on, that they may be one as we are one. I in them. Now, instead of us being in him, he's in us. And you in me. So the Father's in the Son's in the Father, the church is in Christ, Christ is in the church. We are, this is why I was saying, is this. He just winds it around, and from a grammatical and from a logical argument point of view, you just go, you're just circling back and saying the same thing in different ways. You change words, you change the word order, stuff like this. But the amazing thing is we really get the picture here. There is to be a unity in the church, and it's based on the unity in the Godhead. The social relationships among the Trinity are to become social relationships among us. The other thing is that unity in the church is not based upon propositional ideas or concepts. Unity in the church is based upon unity in the Godhead. That's the center that we're drawn to. It's like a black hole. It's sucking everything into that. He goes on, and he says, Father, I desire that they also. And this I desire, really kind of, you get the heart of Christ here. This is his big desire, and I'm going to lay this out. First off, you get 2 repetitions of Father, I desire, and then, O righteous Father. Twice you have Christ addressing the Father in this passage here. Then, if before it was I and you and me, stuff like this time he uses the word to know. He says, even as the world does not know you, this would be the jailer or the girl with the python spirit. World does not know you, I know you. These know that you have sent me. I have made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known. And that idea there that Jesus made known the Father to us, and that he's going to continue to make this known, ties in back with what we looked at last week with the Holy Spirit. I had technical difficulties. You can give me one more minute. Oh, okay, we're good time-wise. Okay, because you loved me, that the love which you have loved me may be in them and I in them. And once again, going back to this idea of love and getting twisted all together there. I'm going to close there because we do need to get Michael his microphone. But if you have any questions or anything like that, or any last-minute questions about the Da Vinci tour, come on up and talk to Carla or me. Actually, you have to work the next service. You need to get changed, or you going to be in the... Okay, so we can answer some questions in that regard. Once again, feel free to talk in Yates Hall after this.